Any good stories from the road?
Pipe up.
I wish we'd gotten to see a little bit more out of our punter.
I'm starting to puke.
It makes my stomach hurt.
I thought he was going to die.
I'm starting to throw up in my mouth a little bit.
He's on the probiotics.
Is Georgia playing the 1985 Bears this weekend or what?
A lot of Todd talk.
Rat poison proof.
They're mongoose.
We will not be hunted at the University of Georgia. I can promise you that. The hunting that we do will be done from us going the other direction.
All right, welcome into the Georgia Show. Georgia beats Auburn 42-10. Jake Rowe joining me live from Sanford Stadium. Jake, fairly or unfairly, the story of the game, at least in my buddy's text mentions right now, is what's going on with Stetson Bennett throwing the football. Georgia dominated the Tigers on the ground with 6 rushing touchdowns, almost 300 yards on the ground, but Stetson off to a shaky start, and people are wondering, man, he hasn't thrown a touchdown in a few games now. Can Georgia compete when it needs to in some of these shootouts and some of the scoreboard watching? You look at Tennessee, what they did against LSU, everyone starts to peak down the schedule a little bit. Yeah, there's Vandy. Yeah, there's the bye week. But what happens when Georgia needs Stetson to deliver in a game?
Slow starts like this are going to get Georgia beat if they keep up. And the crazy thing is, Wes, my biggest complaint from Georgia through the first 3 games, or at least, the first couple of struggle games where they looked great against Samford and Kent State, they played like crap in the fourth quarter. They got off to good starts in those games, but they played like crap in the second half. The last 2 games, Georgia has played so much better in the second half, and they played so poorly in the first half. It's like they can't really put those 4 full quarters together. And, Stetson, I just don't, Wes, I don't know what we saw for 2 quarters in a series there before Georgia decided to kind of run an offense, because we saw a lot of run, pass, a lot of very conservative stuff. And when they got aggressive, they kind of had their way with Auburn.
Yeah, a lot of the schematic things I'm not an expert in. I don't know how to break down coverages and all these schematic things that Todd Monken is doing right now. But for a while there, you nailed it. It seemed so predictable. So like, let's just bang our heads against the wall here and try to do everything so close to the line of scrimmage. It's almost like if Stetson Bennett was ever going to get into a rhythm, how do you expect him to do it when everything's a toss or a screen? And then by the time he had, Brock Bowers was a notable miss streaking down past Auburn's secondary. Ladd McConkey was one where Ladd maybe would have caught the ball if he stayed on his feet instead of diving for it. But a lot of this stuff that wasn't answered against Mizzou. Can Georgia find a downfield passing threat? Georgia still found a way to beat Auburn. Auburn just grossly overmatched in this one, and they were waving the white flag in the third quarter this afternoon. But some of those questions still remain. But, Jake, the big story, the positive, the great headline for this one for Georgia offensively is obviously that run game. 6 touchdowns on the ground. First time Georgia's done that since they did it to UMass. Now they're doing it against SEC competition, albeit SEC competition that is sorely hurting right now in Auburn. But what a day from Kenny McIntosh, Dejon Edwards, and Branson Robinson, and that O-line who really needed to answer some questions after Missouri.
Yeah, this is this is something I was thinking about during the game. If you were able to watch that Penn State-Auburn game, Penn State did the same thing to Auburn. Auburn kind of hung around a little bit, and then Penn State just kind of was able to wear them out and kind of take it to them in the fourth quarter. Georgia did the same thing today, starting kind of midway through the third quarter. Stetson did end up getting into a rhythm. I thought that he made some really good throws, some really good decisions. Looked fast as all get out on a 64-yard touchdown run. But once Georgia started to kind of, all right, listen, we're going to attack this defense. We're not going to try to just get the ball to our athletes and out-athlete them. We're going to attack them schematically with holes in the coverage. I think you saw Stetson, like you said, get into a rhythm. He made some good throws. You look at – so he fumbles. Auburn gets 3 points. Georgia holding them to a field goal was a big momentum grab. They come out on the next drive. They run a play action bootleg. Darnell Washington, 16 yards. Darnell Washington, you had a good day as a receiver, a terrible day as a blocker. 30 yards worth of penalties for that dude today. And then he comes back. He layers the ball over the second level of Auburn's defense, finds Ladd McConkey for what I think was a 21 or 24-yard gain. Georgia's off and running. He hits another pass on that drive Georgia scores 21-3, makes a few good passes, 28-3, makes a few more, up 35-3. And then again, I mean, he actually completed a big third down to Oscar Delp there on that final touchdown drive where Georgia goes up 42-3, or 42-10 at that point. Georgia played an incredible game in the second half on really both sides of the ball, save that shoddy
That
tackling
bust,
on Hunter's touchdown. But I just don't know what we saw there in the first half, and I'm interested to hear Kirby Smart's comments because I surmise I kind of pontificated there in the first half that Stetson may be hurt just because of some of the way those series were called. I mean, they had one series where I think it was 4-minute drive where you'd have thought Georgia would win into a 4-minute offense. They just ran the ball 3 times and punted. They started the second half with run, pass, and then something clicked after that. I don't know if they just got angry or if that defense got them some momentum, but they just kind of took over the ball game at that point, and that's what you want to see. I mean, I would have never thought after that first half of play you would have saw a 500-yard total yardage performance, and that's what Georgia got.
Yeah, they're somehow finding a way to sneak those in there. Case Malarian says it's a non-story that Stetson didn't throw a touchdown today. Yeah, the Dogs missed some opportunities, but finally saw a normal offense in the second half, made a lot of the 10 to 20-yard throws like you just mentioned, Jake. And Uncle Glenn Hartley, changing his name there, part of our Dogs HQ family here, saying keep winning, keep getting better. That's all you can do. The Dogs are 6-0, got what looks like a feisty Vandy team coming to Athens. They gave Ole Miss a test there for a few quarters. But Jake, you talk about the running game. You talk about Georgia on offense finding ways to come to life and not putting everything together in one game. If Georgia can put its passing game from start to finish and this run game that we saw today from start to finish, it's going to be unstoppable. Do you feel like it's just a hallmark of a young team or, look at the O-line, maybe they're finding ways finally to gel after that Missouri struggle that we saw in Columbia? Do you think they're just trying to figure out how to put all these pieces together right now? And do you think that they can do it?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, let's talk about the O-line for just a second. I beat on them after last game, came back and maybe, took back a few of those punches that I threw, in my writing after that Missouri game. Because, Missouri did some things, numbers-wise in the run game in the first half. But the offensive line played incredible. Even on that Stetson Bennett sack where he fumbled, Stetson had time to get rid of the football. He's trying to do too much. They did an incredible job today. They deserve a pat on the back for that. Wes, whether you want to call it young or inexperienced or lacking in leadership or even injuries, right? Because we still – I mean –
I don't think Georgia fans want to go there after the national championship.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but we still don't know kind of, Georgia came into the season pretty thin at receiver anyway. And, that A.D. Mitchell's been out for a while. I think, there's this whole theory that maybe you get a little bit easier to defend the more teams see you adjust to not having a guy. A.D. was back on the field a little bit today, and that's a good sign. But I think there's a lot of different factors here. But it all boils down to one thing, and that's Georgia has not put together 4 full quarters in basically 4 of its last 5 games. It did against Oregon. It did against South Carolina. It didn't against Samford, Kent State, Missouri, or Auburn. And, I will say this, though. What a luxury it is to be able to say that about your team and be 6-0 at the halfway point of the season.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't underestimate that. You can't underrate that. Alan Frazier says, go Dogs from Plano. And Alan also says Branson Robinson is the next one. Go Dogs. He certainly looked like he was hitting his proverbial stride today. And I think out of fall camp, we were hearing that Andrew Paul, before he got injured, was actually the more impressive freshman from some of the reports we were getting. Bummer he goes down with an injury. But now Branson Robinson really has no choice but to be the guy with Kendall Milton dealing with injuries and Dejan now kind of being that counterpunch to Kenny McIntosh in the backfield. One thing that we were getting questions about while the game was still kind of hanging in the balance was about Georgia's rotation at running back, how strange it is. I don't know if you want to call it strange, but it's remarkable, notable that Georgia doesn't really let guys get lathered up. They let them pick up a big gain, and then they'll put in Dejon. And then after Dejon has a big carry, Robinson might go in, and then Kenny goes in after that. What do you make of that, Jake?
They've done it for years now, and I'm not a big fan of it. I'll be the first to tell you. I think that they're a little too trigger happy when it comes to that, and I understand that they're trying to keep a guy fresh, but I also think they've got the data. Okay, I will say that they've got the data on Kenny McIntosh. How does he look after 3 touches in 5 plays, or how does so and so look at this, and maybe their data supports that. To me, it's just kind of hard watching a guy rip off a 20-yard run and come directly out of the game.
Right.
And you see it a lot. I'm not a huge fan of it, but they've done it for years, and it's not something new. I don't think there's any recent method to the madness. I think it's just the same method, the same madness that we've seen for a little while now. And you didn't see it as much when they had a DeAndre Swift or a Nick Chubb or Sony Michel. You'd see those guys kind of get drives, or at least get half drives. But I was really impressed with what I saw after Branson Robinson. The dude came up 6 feet short of a 100-yard game.
Yeah, that was really impressive, man. It's whatever the thought process is, you can't argue with it when you see numbers like that. Robinson, 12 carries, 98 yards, and a touchdown. Dejon, 12 carries, 83 yards, 3 touchdowns. Very physical running today out of the running backs. And I just want to highlight them for another minute here, because they've almost flown under the radar this season, which is really saying something for a school that calls itself RBU, for a team that calls itself RBU. But whether it's a game plan thing, a decision there, we spoke about how a lot of Georgia's yards that came through the passing game with some of those pop passes they considered to be rushing yards. But whatever the case is, it was refreshing today to see Georgia's running backs actually dominate today and do it in kind of in old man football kind of style.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And you saw the offensive line, Palmer mentioned this at halftime, and it didn't really click with me before that. The way you especially saw this in the first half, the way Georgia's running backs would kind of keep their feet at the end of runs. And here came the offensive line covering down, pushing the pile, turning a 12-yard gain into a 19-yard gain. I mean, that was something that I have no doubt in my mind really wore down the Auburn defense and really kind of, took their will a little bit. And obviously, we hadn't got into the defense yet, but, some comments made this week that some guys probably fired the whole team up, not just the defense.
Yeah, Nicholas Swain says if Georgia runs the second half, like the second half today for the rest of the season, the pass game we have will get us by. I don't know about that. I mean, theoretically, if you did do that against every team you played, that might work, but I don't know if you're going to be able to run it with this much success against everybody on your schedule. Andy Stowe says Branson looks like he could be a difference maker, runs really dang hard, might be time to get him 15 touches a game. And Case observed some of the dominance was a scheme change, gap plays off tackle and in the B gaps. I did hear a lot more of some of those edge perimeter blockers having their names called in the second half as well. But yeah, let's talk about old Auburn center Brandon Council and his proclamation that Auburn could demolish Georgia's defensive front. Other than the 3 points they gave up after Stetson's fumble and that bust on the explosive play when the game was definitely out of reach for Auburn, they had 10 penalties today, Jake, for 60 yards. And Georgia's crowd today, you texted us about the traffic coming into Athens, how it was the craziest you'd seen in years. I think Georgia's fan base, I wasn't in the stadium, I didn't hear it, but I think that they had a hand in this one for sure in causing Auburn to play football that they're not used to playing so far this season. They were uncomfortable their first time on the road. I don't know how you do that, go 5 games into a season without a road game, but they made Robbie Ashford feel uncomfortable, and that O-line was struggling all game with some of their snap counts. Yeah,
and I have to give the crowd a lot of credit because they did stay in the game when it wasn't an exciting football game for the first 32, 33 minutes. I mean, Georgia didn't give them a ton to get super fired up about. The defense did, I guess, but Georgia just whipped them up front. And I don't know if it had as much to do as the game went on because it wasn't the penalties weren't there right to begin with because of the crowd noise. So that I don't know if Georgia just kind of whipped them so good that maybe they were trying to get a head start on some stuff. I'm sure the crowd had something to do with it. I'm sure it was all of those things, but Georgia got after them up front, and really Auburn, the only run game Auburn had to speak of was, Robbie Ashford doing what he did, because he had 9 carries for 52 yards. Most of that was on scramble type plays. If you take Robbie Ashford's scrambling out of the play where Auburn wasn't trying to run block, they had 16 carries for 41 yards, and still just had 3.7 yards a carry overall. And like I said, Ashford had most of that. He had a good chunk of it on that prayer drive they had right before halftime. So Georgia did an incredible job, and they kept that kid completely off balance. I mean, he made a couple of throws. I was like, man, that was a really good throw while you're basically backpedaling, but they were in his face all day.
He was very frustrated. I mean, you could see his body language on the TV broadcast. When you go back and watch it, you'll see how frustrated he was on Auburn's sideline. Obviously, after that unforced fumble where he just dropped it, and Georgia's right there to fall on the ball, he was frustrated by that. But you can't just go into your season, not go on the road, have your first SEC start, put the ball in the turf like that, and expect to come out a winner and expect to come out composed. I mean, if Georgia had a jersey in his peripheral vision, he was throwing it away to either Auburn's bench or Georgia's bench. And again, you're not going to be able to rattle every quarterback like that when you play in the season, but all Georgia can do is play who's on their schedule today. And this Auburn team, Jake, we'll get into it more when we talk about it tomorrow night with Palmer with our final thoughts, as we do every Sunday here on the Dawgs HQ YouTube channel. Hit subscribe and help us grow this follower base. But it's just remarkable to see Auburn's program take the turns that it has. And I'm at a loss in this rivalry, seeing how Georgia is thoroughly dominating the Tigers. It's wild to see after growing up watching this be a pretty contested series in years past.
That's 15 out of the last 18, I believe it is, and 6 in a row in the rivalry, which is pretty nuts. Auburn still hasn't beaten Georgia inside Sanford Stadium since 2005. That's just a long time to do that, and they still haven't scored more than 1 touchdown in a game since 2009. So it's Georgia dominated the game defensively. That was the game. Reminded me, West, a lot of the Florida game last year. Minus Georgia's defense creating.
That's a good point. Yeah,
some touchdowns there, because Georgia just really didn't have any offensive answers early in that game. I think they had 3. And then, special teams was what set Georgia up for a couple of scores there in the first half. And then all of a sudden it kind of comes alive and really beats the daylights out of Auburn there in the second half. But, we're seeing Georgia kind of do it in pieces at this point. We've seen a couple of complete games. We've seen a couple of great first halves, poor second halves. We've seen a couple of poor first halves, great second halves. This team has to grow up. This team has to get healthy. And keep establishing its identity, and we'll see where it goes. It really is all about kind of how much better you get as the season goes on, and Georgia's corrected some issues as far as being able to execute in the second half, but now it needs to get back to starting quicker. And I think if it can put it together, I still feel about this team the same way I did before last week. It's still the easiest team I've covered at Georgia to figure out. It's on its best day, it can beat anybody playing their best ball. On its worst day, it's going to struggle and it's going to look ugly. And the ceiling's high, the floor is low. Keep raising the floor.
Yeah, I think the point you made about the Florida game is important for people to remember, because it's not like you look back on that 2021 season, obviously through rose-colored glasses, they're the national champs, but there were moments where they weren't doing everything they could on offense, and they still found a way to, by the end of the game, dominate on the scoreboard. It's just a question of how does this team start fast. And the thing about Stetson, man, was just as soon as he started on a couple slow drives coming off of that Missouri game, you were just assuming that it was a continuation of that last one. But I almost wonder if when you go back and watch this a second time, if you don't, knowing what the outcome is going to be, if you don't just see that as a hiccup and see it as its own storyline in this game instead of just tying it to Mizzou. I mean, this team is evolving as the season goes along, and they're having to do it with a rotating cast of characters without A.D. Mitchell in there. Brock Bowers and Darnell Washington aren't surprising anyone anymore. So Todd Monken's going to have to continue to find ways to be creative and find more opportunities for guys. But for now, you just got to start. You got to start faster. I mean, that's going to put a lot of fans' minds at ease, I think.
Right. And again, I'm not criticizing. I'm questioning. And, I put a question mark beside the plan coming out. I thought the plan looked odd, looked weird. The execution of it, Stetson didn't look right. You talked about it, no rhythm. Again, something that's bit them now, 3 games in a row, untimely penalties. You look at Georgia's first opportunity to score in that game. Jack Podlesny ends up missing a 47-yard field goal, but he misses that 47-yard field goal because on 3rd and 1, a 15-yard penalty wiped out a first down run that would have put Georgia either in the red zone or knocking on the red zone. Let's point out one real massive positive in this game, though, Wes. Last week against Missouri, Georgia struggled in the red zone. This week, Georgia went 6 of 6 touchdowns each time it got in.
Well, I mean, look, it's a chicken and the egg thing because all of their touchdowns were on the ground. But when you're trying to pass in the red zone versus when you have a dominant rushing attack, I mean, it's night and day. If you can run the ball successfully with a physical offensive line, it makes scoring in the red zone a lot easier than trying to find someone in a low percentage pass. And it doesn't help when Stetson's also missed Darnell Washington and Brock in games past, and Kirby brought that up this past week too. So Georgia can find a way to be dominant in the run game. It does help them in the red zone. That's a great point.
Yeah, no doubt. And some of those passes set them up for some of those, lower red zone opportunities. But that was the big difference, was just the offensive line coming to play, getting a hat on a hat, kind of wearing out Auburn out up front. And Georgia's offensive line did the demolishing today.
That's a great point, Jake, and we will wrap it up on that. Please hit subscribe on Dawgs HQ's YouTube channel. If you are listening to this on a replay on podcast, we invite you to follow there as well. Leave us a review, kind remark in the comments section, and join us every Sunday night at 8:30 as we get our final thoughts. Once the rest of the college football action from the weekend shakes out and we get a little bit more perspective, a little bit more context, we like to give this one more look. So join us tomorrow night as well as we take another look at Georgia's 42-10 win over Auburn. Jake, thanks again as always, man. I'll talk to you soon. Have a great night.
All right, buddy. Thank you.